guys, welcome back. I appreciate you being here today. We got a nice sunny day. It's still the winter time, but we're getting there, getting towards spring. I'm really excited today, as always, of course, for my guest, Albert Atwell. He's my friend. He's a very, very intelligent man. I have a lot of respect for him. He knows a lot of history, in particular history about the Americas that some people might say, oh, that's ridiculous. Some people might think it's controversial. I don't. I think it's phenomenal. So I invited him on the show so he can give his take and provide his evidence and data. He's got a lot of supporting evidence. In fact, 40, 50 years or more of evidence. It's actually quite remarkable. Okay, so I'm just going to read a quick bio for Albert, and we'll kind of get right into it. Albert was 1954 in McDowell County, West Virginia. At 5, his father told him that his great-grandfather had been a personal bodyguard for President Abraham Lincoln, and that his grandfather had been a bodyguard for Jefferson Davis of the Confederacy. His father told him about a lot of treasure that was hidden during and also after the Civil War. And when Albert was 13, he found his first gold ring, and he had bought a metal detector for the JCPenney catalog. I even remember the JCPenney catalogs. I was kind of at the tail end of that one, but so at 13, he found his first gold ring, and since then he started to research, and he's been treasure hunting for 52 years. He started to research his ancestors, and he learned that he is descended from Joseph of Arimathea, his daughter Anna, actually, King Arthur II, and we're going to talk a lot about him and what he did when he came over to North America. That's kind of going to be the focus of the story today, kind of at the tail end of the show there. And also Prince Henry Sinclair, who people are probably familiar with from Curse of Oak Island. So we'll be talking about that a little bit. Okay, and the dates that Albert has provided, King Arthur II came to North America in 574 AD. Sir Ralph de Studley, who is also a feature on Oak Island, if people have watched that show, 1178, came over to North America. And then Prince Henry Sinclair in 1353. And so Albert has been doing research on the Knights Templar. It kind of led him to start with that and then to be able to develop that more. So for the past really 13 years. And he's located, or he's basically found evidence for 38 shiploads of treasure located in, I believe, in the Americas. I'll let him talk more about that to you guys. And the quest to recover that treasures is currently on and continuing to develop. And it's actually very exciting. I will provide links for Albert underneath the description, guys. I'll have his Facebook link up there and also his email, and I'll put his 2 phone numbers if you want to get in contact with him, if you want to share anything with him, give him feedback. I believe he's also looking for funding for some of the treasure ventures that he's going into. So if anyone is interested in assisting with that, that'd be fantastic. So Albert, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here, Dave.
Yeah, it's awesome. We've been a long time planning, and Albert's a good friend, so I appreciate it. All right, so why don't we get into the Knights Templar sort of in North America? If people don't know the basic premise of the Knights Templar, basically it's peaceful, well, warrior monks, let's put it that way. And they had a higher purpose, but they engaged war, obviously, to protect those purposes, to protect the secrets that they supposedly had. To protect secrets of lineage and treasures and all kinds of things like that. A lot of people say that they were the ones who actually started the money system, the banking system. And people also know them as having protected the Christians during the Crusades, coming to Jerusalem, making sure that they were able to have safe passage into the city. And then a lot of people think while they were there, or even perhaps their main purpose was to actually recover treasures from beneath Solomon's temple. Some people think that happened, some people don't. And then the people who do believe that the treasures were secreted away to other locales. Some people talk about Ethiopia. That's a really interesting one. Coptic texts from Ethiopia suggest the Ark of the Covenant went over there. And then the rest of the people kind of say that they went up through Europe and they sort of moved across the land into different areas and perhaps even sort of established Switzerland and the banking system of Switzerland. You have a sect that supposedly went over to Portugal called the Knights of Christ. And then eventually they ended up, France, so was the center of everything. And then they ended up moving up through England and Scotland, and then supposedly from Scotland, from Rosslyn Chapel, supposedly was one of the last strongholds of the Templar in Europe. And then the idea is that they actually go over North America. So I'll let Albert pick up from right there. Albert, want to go with it?
Okay. In the books by Zena Halpern and Don Rue about the Cremona document, it talks about the Knights Templars where they went under the south wall of the Temple of the Rock, where Solomon had his stables and everything down below. And they also found that there used to be a church down there because there was a Christian fish that was in the marble floors. And when they were down there hunting around, after they found their way to where the tomb and everything was, they found osaries down there that had one that had John on it. So, and his head had been severed, like it had been chopped off. So they figured it was John the Baptist. And it did have John on the osary. And they carried 4 of those osaries out with them. I don't know which ones they took. And they also found the gold of Solomon down there. And it was stacked in pyramid, like the pyramids on the back of the dollar bill, US dollar bill. And they found a whole bunch of sacred knowledge and some brass instruments for navigating over to this country. And that was in 1109. In 1170, they had made their first settlement over here on the North American continent, and it was up on the Hudson River. They called it Salt River. But the things they got down in that tomb, those instruments for navigating and everything, plus the maps, that showed them how to get over here. And they made a total of 17 settlements on the North American continent. They made from 1170 on the Hudson River till 1502. And it was down next to where Washington, D.C. and Richmond was located across from New Jersey. And they brought their treasures over after they had left. They went to France, where the 17 or 18 ships were there at France. Those ships sailed north and went to the Isle of Man. And one of my great-grandmothers was the ruler in the Isle of Man when they showed up there. But it was just a way station for them because they left there and went to Scotland. And there, King de Bruce welcomed them. And King de Bruce was like a great-grandfather to Henry Sinclair. And he gave them sanctuary there. And when it come up to like 1300, and some right after the Battle of Bannockburn, so Sir Henry Sinclair's grandfather, Henry Sinclair, he brought about 200 knights and some treasure over with them in 13 and 14, because they'd already been over here like 150 years before that. And then after he made several trips over here, his son, William, father of Henry Sinclair, the Earl of Orkney Islands and everything, he took the treasures over. He made 4 trips himself. He came over with his dad in 1353 when he was 8 years old. And he came back over in 1395 with the Zeno brothers. Antonio Zeno, was his navigator. And he's the one that made the maps, Antonio Zeno, of the islands up in Nova Scotia and Greenland, and mostly Greenland. He mapped all of Greenland even before he sailed over here. But he brought all the maps and everything where the islands was that he's going to put the treasures on. And then he went back home. He dropped enough knights off in Nova Scotia to start a settlement at New Ross in 1395. And he dropped another 40 or 45 knights off at Massachusetts, and they started a settlement up next to Westford. That was in 1395. And then he went back home, and they did another voyage of discovery in 1398, and they brought 7 shiploads of treasure over with them. And those 7 shiploads went to the islands that they had already checked out in 1395, where they was going to bury it. But when he left the island of Skye, where he had his Indian friends and everything, he run into like a hurricane or a nor'easter, and it blew him off course. Two ships went way far out to sea, and he seen the mast get hit by lightning on some of the ships that had some of his kin on it. And they made for shore, so they was going to get back together, after a storm. But he was swept by a rogue wave that hit him near Oak Island, and it threw him up in the swamp area of Oak Island. And on the entry, they'd hit a stump. It busted out the front part of the ship, and they was trying to repair it and get it back to the South Shore. After all the other knights, had gathered up in the other ships with the treasures. There's one of them that was missing, though, and it had sunk out at sea somewhere halfway across St. Margaret's Bay, which is my home bay today. And Margaret's Bay is now up at Halifax. But when they got swept into the middle of the swamp, all these knights and the crews that was on the ships, they tried to dig a trench through the swamp to put it back to the South Shore so they could float it again. But it failed after 5 weeks of digging, and it didn't work. So all the captains and all of them got together, and they decided that they'd had to bury the treasure right there on Oak Island. They didn't plan on burying it on Oak Island, but they had to because, it's so heavy and everything. So they took the treasure and they decided to bury it in 2 different locations. And one was up on the North Shore and one was on the Southeast Shore. And after they had buried the treasures, they took the ship plankings and everything and made a shanty or a little building for 3 nights to stay and guard the treasure. And then they burned the ship in the swamp. They burned it, and that's where they found all these pieces for the ships and everything. I think there was even a kiln that was found in the swamp, and it's supposed to be in the Chester Museum, Railroad Museum. But I haven't seen or haven't heard anybody else say anything about it.
That Chester Museum, Albert. That Chester Museum.
Chester Railroad. Yeah.
It's a very interesting museum. I had some time to go in there and kind of look around when I was up on Oak Island in 2017. It might have been 2018 that I actually went to the museum. But there's some original stuff in there, guys. If anyone ever gets up there, it's a very unassuming building. It's the old railroad depot right next to the old railroad tracks, and they actually have like farmers markets and things around there during the summer. It's a nice area, so I'd recommend people check that out. So Albert, let me ask you this before you continue. Who do you think actually created the swamp? If the Templar came in and sailed in there, was it already there, or what do you think is going on with that?
Well, the water has risen since that time, so the swamp wasn't there at the time that Sinclair was there. It was like a bog area, And then when the water started rising, then it formed a swamp.
All right,
but the swamp was mostly formed when they put the road in.
Oh, I understand what you're saying. Okay, because
that road was backing up the fresh water.
Okay, it's interesting too because as far as I know, that was the second road put in on the island. The first road went up Fred Nolan's driveway and across the north side of the island.
Yeah.
Up over the hill into the money pit, and then the second one was put in a little bit later. But it's really interesting because even in the last episode, which I know we both watched, they're finding really big tree stumps, and at the very bottom of the hard pack of the swamp. It's pretty strange, which suggests at some point, at the very minimum, that there was maybe a little bit of standing water, but certainly not. You're not going to have a bunch of salt. You're not going to have a bunch of salt water in there and trees growing well. We're talking about maybe cypress or something. I don't know.
If you go down in the bayous and everything, you got big trees, cypress trees and everything in the swamps down there.
Right.
It all depends on how. Yeah, go ahead.
Do those trees, Albert, do some of them have access to salt water, or are they all always fresh water?
I think it's fresh water. I don't think they live in salt water.
Yeah, I thought so too. Okay, great. Back to Oak Island. So they basically they weren't planning on doing it. They sail into the swamp, and then they say, we got to do something with this, and then they end up burying it.
Yeah, and the funny thing about it, they used ballast. Barrels of acorns was the ballast. And when it came in to, hit that stump and it broke the front part of the ship out, the acorns were spread all over the place. And that's where a lot of the oak trees came from on Oak Island.
And so those acorns came from somewhere in Europe, we're suggesting, or
Yeah,
where are we
from
thinking?
Scotland. They came from Scotland.
Scotland, okay. I mean, I actually didn't even know Scotland had oak trees. That's really
Oh,
interesting.
yeah.
Well, as you get the further up north you get in Scotland, I mean, there's actually no oak trees, if I'm not mistaken. I feel like it's mostly rocks and mosses and lichens and stuff, right?
Yeah. But
Great. Okay.
Oak Island at the time that the treasure was put on it, Henry St. Clair gave the name of Dog Island. And it might have been named Dog Island before that because King Arthur, when he came over with his brother Maddox, now his name was Maddox, Maydog, and English was Matthew, and they called it Dog Island for him, Maydog, because they landed on Oak Island too. But at the time it was Dog Island. He went through several other names, Gloucester Island, before it ever got to be Oak Island.
That map, Albert, of the Gloucester Island or Gloucester Isle is interesting because, and that was shown on the Curse Folk Island too, but it's interesting to me because the shoreline is not really delineated the way the island actually is. And part of me thinks that they wanted to kind of conceal the identity, to at least try a little bit. It's a very jagged island on the map. It's kind of strange.
I have a feeling that cartographer, though, I think he fantasized a lot of that and made a lot of it up because I used to do the same thing in school when I had to draw maps. You just make it the way you want to look at it. But I don't think that's the way it was.
And so you think,
he put too many curves. Huh?
Okay, so you think it was purposeful then, the way that was drawn, or?
Yeah, he probably didn't ever have much of a view of Oak Island.
Okay, I got what you're saying. Yeah, because actually, when we see the island, we're getting drone shots and stuff, and of course they didn't have access to anything like that, so I totally get that. And also, I mean, there's so much to draw. You're creating a new map, coming to a new area. I feel like you're doing the best you can. Okay, so in any case, so what did they bury there, Albert?
Well, up at the North Cove, it was chests and trunks of gold coins and silver coins, and church artifacts, crosses and things like that. And down at the other place was more of church artifacts that was put at the other place, but it wasn't anything holy.
Okay, and so
they did bury and recover several menorahs off of Frog Island.
Okay, which is the one right to the north, right?
When we get to the recovery.
Okay. So the entire objective for them to come over here in the first place was to bring a safe haven for treasures. Would that be correct?
Yeah, they wanted to start New Jerusalem, for the temple, their own country.
Okay, and they wanted their own country so that they could abide by their laws and spiritual rules and things, or?
Yeah, to get away from the Pope, the Catholic Church.
Yeah, they were. If people don't know, they were persecuted. And
yeah,
what was? Yeah, 1307, Albert. That was the last Grand Master. Is that right?
Yeah, the last one before they changed the names of it, but they changed it over to different other things. They was Knights of Rhodes, Knights of Christ, Hospitallers. They were still Knights Templars, though.
Yeah,
they just changed the name to satisfy the king and the Pope.
Okay, so they come over here, they bury some things, and talk about where else you think they were, Albert. I mean, we're talking about a lot of sort of New England and the Northeast United States, right?
Well, the 6 shiploads that they buried in Mahone Bay, between Mahone Bay and Halifax. And the other shipload, they sailed up to St. Lawrence River and buried it. I don't know, it must have been something really important. Something, better than gold or silver.
Okay, so
the 6 shiploads they left in Mahone Bay, though, they put it on the island. So there was 2 half shiploads on Oak Island. They put another shipload on Frog Island and 1 shipload on Mason's Island. And then there was another shipload they put on East Ironbound Island. That was the ship that sank. And the 3 nights that stayed there on Oak Island, they had to salvage it, and they must have salvaged it because it was recovered later. And I pretty much, I got the latitudes and the locations of where they're buried and all that stuff.
Okay, so what was their idea behind how are we going to have a recovery in the future? Like how were people supposed to find all these things? And did they have a timeline, and how did they envision that going?
Well, they was mostly just trying to get it over here to start with. And then when the American Revolution started, Nova Scotia was the 14th colony. There was 13 colonies in the United States, and Nova Scotia was 14th colony. And it was separated from the other colonies. So the provisional presidents, they couldn't decide on whether, to keep Nova Scotia or how they could defend it, and they couldn't defend it anyway because it had been separated like it was. So they decided to just get the treasures and bring them down to the 13 colonies. And that's what they did in 1770. And they'd been planning it for 4 years, 1766. All this is coming from the journals of Prince Henry Sinclair that was wrote by Diana Muir. And of course, everybody says that they're not real because of the originals, wasn't kept. But there was several pages out of the originals that was kept. And the maps that was on a lambskin, it was carbon dated. And the map was made by Antonio Zeno, and it had the date on it, 1395, and had his initials, AZ. And those maps had been used for the past 200 or 300 years. Even Columbus used them to get over here. And those maps ended up in Europe in 1300s, about late 1300s. They showed up in Europe. And I don't know how they got there. But she got rid of the maps and most of the originals, but she kept 3 original pages. One of the pages was the handwriting of Henry Sinclair in Latin. And I tried to find some original writing of Prince Henry so I could compare the handwritings, to validate the journal. Couldn't find it. He didn't write anything. He had somebody else to write it for him. And recently I went and checked on the other end of the journals, which was John Weems that lived down in Baileyton, Tennessee, where she found the journals. He was the last one that recorded in the journals, and he died in 1812. But I got a deed the other day, or a will, where he had wrote his will. And I compared the handwriting. The handwriting is identical to what's in the journals. So that proves his part of the journal anyway. And he was one that recovered the treasures with some of his kin and some of the Freemasons out of South Carolina and Hillsborough, North Carolina. Even the Grand Master of the Freemasons in the United States out of North Carolina, he was in on the recovery himself. And John C. Calhoun's father, Patrick Calhoun, he was in on the recovery. That's how all this country started.
Okay, so that was around the Revolution, Albert? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, 1770. They had 6 weeks. They went up there and they recovered the treasures in 6 weeks' time. All of them. There was one on Oak Island they couldn't get to. The one on the south shore of Oak Island they couldn't get to. They dug a shaft down to it, and they hit water. Couldn't recover the treasure, so they figured they'd dig a slope to it, a tunnel, and it hit water in it. So that one wasn't recovered in 1770, but they vowed that they was going to recover it, which they probably did later that fall or either the spring of the next year, because that's what the Smith's Cove, when they did that dating on the logs and the fortifications, they called it the U-shaped structure. All of it dated 1769, 1771. Well, that's the time they was there recovering the treasures. So
okay, so that was a recovery.
Huh?
that was an area that they would have docked their ships and set up camp and stuff like that. And in order to,
Yeah, that's the treasure that they couldn't recover was in that location. They built all that U-shaped structure and everything to try to keep the water out so they could recover it. It was in the cave-in pit. That's where the other half of the treasure was, and the other half was up at Fred Nolan's. But
okay,
there was other Templars, see, from Portugal and France. They also was doing their thing and bringing treasures over too, which wasn't recorded. We don't know what they did with their treasures.
that's one of the things, Albert, that I've thought a lot about is that, you know, when I went onto the island and presented my theory, it was according to mostly numbers, in my case, numbers and compass bearing measurements and things and ancient teachings. But what's interesting is because if this was such an important place, which I believe it was, I believe it goes much further back into antiquity, like way into pre-recorded history, in my opinion. And it's going to be hard to prove those things, I think, at this time. But
Yeah,
that's
I
my
think it goes
feeling.
back 4,000 or 5,000 years.
Oh, yeah, minimum for me. I personally think 10,000 or more. But in any case, the thing about this is that, well, first of all, I talked about this, I think, in my last show with Alessandro Nadivari. We were talking about how Newfoundland area and Nova Scotia areas is really one of the first places you're going to hit after you hit the Labrador coast of Canada, and you're going to be forced to come straight south. You hit Newfoundland, then you go through Nova Scotia. So anyone coming, if you're taking the northern route, anyone coming over here is generally going to go past these areas. And the thing about
Nova Scotia.
Exactly. And so there's going to be people from all different cultures, regardless of what's going on. But you're right. And the thing is that you can bury, and it's very conceivable, it makes perfect sense to me, is that if this place was known about, which I think we both agree on, then you can come and bury a treasure there according to whatever system that you want to bury it. So there may be unrelated things to maybe the larger treasures on the island. And I can't speak to some of those things because I'm looking kind of at the big picture of the island. There could have been pirates on any of, and we know there were privateers that owned, I believe, several of the lots on Oak Island back in the day. And they could have buried stuff on their land, you know, and put a stake in the ground or something. And no one's going to know about it because they didn't leave any clues.
The Freemasons up at Nova Scotia, I mean, they knew where the treasures were. They was watching them. Plus, they had the Micmac Indians, and they had been guarding the treasure for 300 or 400 years for them. That's the reason why they were scared off the islands. They was watching them and protecting them. If they couldn't scare you off, you ended up buried in the swamp somewhere.
So is that the reason why they set up the? I believe it was actually the second lodge, I believe, in Nova Scotia was in Chester, which is just up the road from the island, and I think the first was in Halifax. So okay, so they knew. I'm sorry, go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you're saying that they knew what was there and they were keeping an eye on it, and so where does that stand? Where do we stand now with that? I mean, have they recovered it? Do they still know? What are we thinking with it?
Well, some of them lived up at Annapolis, and some of them lived up at where the fortifications was built up there. That's where they first settled. They had a nice Templar settlement up there too, and by 1398, I think it was, or 1432, they was already making like 500 barrels or something of wine a year from the grapes, you know, and everything. That's what they was doing in Massachusetts too. They had big grape farms and everything, making wineries.
Yeah, and since you bring up the wine topic, I can really comment on that. I don't know if I had a chance to last show, but you know, I grew up going to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which is obviously just down the road from the Maine coast and really Nova Scotia. They're really not that far from each other. In any case, there are lots of wild grapes everywhere, and they smell incredibly good. It's very aromatic. I didn't know. I thought it was like I thought it was like fake or something when I was a kid. I couldn't believe how strong the scent of grapes were in the area. We're talking about wild grapes. And then I went down to when I was in Rhode Island the other year. I actually camped in Narragansett, Rhode Island, and the campground there, right behind my campsite, it was all wild grape plants everywhere. and they were tall. I mean, 7, 8 feet tall, grapes everywhere. You could smell the grape scent. So I can comment on that personally, and I think they were supposed to. I mean, up through Nova Scotia, but I thought part of Newfoundland also had some wild grapes, and I think that was about the extent of how far north. However, I also know, because I've talked to people about it, that even all the way down into New Jersey, there's lots of grapes on the coast, the wild grapes. People saying, "Yeah, in my backyard," and all these things. So when you talk about Vinland, which is of course before the Templar, you're talking about the Vikings and how they described their trek to Vinland. For me, it could be anywhere all the way down, I guess, to southern New Jersey. They may go even further. I don't know about grapes after that, but how about the Vikings, Albert? They obviously came before, right? We know that they were here.
Yeah, but King Arthur came before they did. He'd already conquered all the northern islands.
Exactly. All right, so let's go back to the Vikings for a second. I just want to talk about this quick. So we know about the settlement in Newfoundland, and it was supposed to be about 1000 AD. It's called Lansaw Meadows. It's the very northern tip of Newfoundland, and we don't have any other Viking settlements in North America, or not close in North America. Yeah. Why do you think that is, Albert? Why do we only have that one site in Newfoundland?
Well, we know the Vikings didn't build all the Indian mounds and everything, as they call them, in North America, and there's over 10,000 mounds in Ohio alone, and then there's mounds all up and down the Mississippi, Ohio River, and that was King Arthur's people. They was one that did that because they made a big exodus over here in 574, and they brought 700 ships and could have had as many as 1,200 ships. And over 70,000 of his people and his army he brought with him, because his land had been devastated by a comet that exploded over southern England and broke into pieces. Some of it went all the way down into Ecuador, and some of it off the coast of Florida in the Caribbean. But the explosion over England, the ground temperature was 10,000 degrees, about like a nuclear bomb. And it was about 100 times more powerful than the bombs that went off in Hiroshima, World War II. The temperature got up 10,000 degrees, and some of the people were vaporized. Most of them was killed, 2 million was killed out of the 12 million that lived there at the time. And people, they scoff and laugh at all this and everything, but there's evidence of it in the swamps, and you can see the trees laid and blowed down, just like it was in 1908 when the comet exploded, over Russia, Siberia. You can see from the impact area how it just knocks all the trees down in all directions.
That was the Tunguska event, right?
Where the comet, some of it hit into the Atlantic Ocean, see, it caused tidal waves too, and some of the cities along the coast of England is underwater. The ports and everything went underwater, real deep underwater. And all of that can be found over right now to show that the comet really happened. And then there was a man named Gregory of Tours in France. He wrote at the time about where the sky was red over the 2 islands in the north, and it'd been red for like 10 days. And he wrote that in 564, 565, about the same time that the comet hit. So we know that the comets happened, and the buildings in southern England and Wales, where they had their churches and the temples and the Roman fortifications, they was knocked to the ground, and the sand had melted and turned into glass. That's how hot it got. All the fish died, the trees died, all animals was dead. Nothing could live, and that's the reason why, in the myths about King Arthur, he calls the land of desolation. That's what it was. The comet had destroyed everything. Well, King Arthur was in Ludal, which is Normandy in France, fighting in France, and that's when the comet hit. And his brother Maddox was at sea out in the Atlantic, and the storms and everything swept him out. He didn't know where he was. He got lost, and he found his way down to the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, and he went up to where the mouth of the Mississippi River is, and he sailed up it. and he stayed there for 10 years because he couldn't, he didn't know where it was. And after he figured out the stars and everything else, he finally managed to sail back around Florida up toward Nova Scotia, and he found his way back home 10 years after he had left. Well, King Arthur showed up out of Normandy at the same time, 10 years later, 572. And by this time, Maddox already had two sons. One happened to be called Morgan in English. I don't know the Welsh names, but Morgan means one across the sea or across the waters. And he was like 9 or 10 years old because, that's how long Maddox was gone. And in the books and everything, my Bobby G or something they call it, journals, they had him called as a little brown boy. He sat on King Arthur's lap and he told him about this country over here, how fertile it was, how green it was. So King Arthur talked to his general or astrologer, whatever he was, Gwendon, and he wanted him to sail back over here with Maddox to verify that what Maddox was telling him was truth. Maddox told him it was like the stars was like 7 days difference than it was in, Wales. And with 7 days, he meant 7 15-minute, intervals, about like our time zones today. And that would be about 90 to 105 degrees, from Wales. And once they sailed back over here in 572, and they went back home, they got back home about 574. It took them a year over, a year back, something like that. But when he got back at Gwendon, he told them that, yes, everything was like Maddox said it was. It was a big country and fertile and rich and plenty of game, fish. So King Arthur, the 2 years they was gone, he had been building more ships, plus the ships that he had when he came from France with his army. That was like 700 ships. And they set sail from Milford Haven Bay and came over here. They all landed mostly in Vermont and up and down the coast. And some of them sailed and went on down into Mexico and up into Alabama. And that's where Maddox lived for a long time, was down next to Mobile, Alabama. That's where he had his two sons when he was over here the first time. And they started exploring up the Mississippi and up the Ohio River and the Tennessee River. And Maddox decided he wanted to live on the Little Tennessee River, which is down where Kingsport, near that area, Kingsport, Tennessee. And that's where he was buried after he died, was down at Back Creek, Tennessee, on the Little Tennessee River. And the archaeologists went down and dug that up in 1895 or 96. No, it was 1891. And those records went to the Smithsonian, his bones, jawbone, part of his skull. And he had two bracelets on, which the archaeologists put down as copper. But since they've been checked to see what they're made out of, and they have more brass in them than regular brass has, which shows it goes back to about 200 AD. And the mound where Maddox was buried, it had never been disturbed. And the strange thing about it, there was 9 skeletons in the vault, tipped in vault number 3, or mound number 3. And 8 of the heads was facing the north, and one of the heads was facing the south. But what you got to remember, before the 11th and 12th century, east used to be north. So they was buried facing the east. But scientists think they was buried facing the north. But the one that wasn't buried toward the north was buried south. That was his Indian wife, because she wasn't a Christian, I guess, or hadn't been Christianized. But anyway, they was facing the north, which was east back then on the maps and everything.
So when you say it was east back then, what does that exactly mean?
Well, if you notice the maps they draw back before that time, they had east at the top.
Yep.
West was down south, and north was actually east today. What it is, when we started keeping time and everything, like 6,000 years ago, the universe had shifted 1/4 of a turn, which is 90 degrees. So east become where north is, and north ended up at the other place. It switched places.
Okay, so does that mean that the continents also shifted, or are you talking about just the Earth?
No, the continents stayed the same. It's the rotation of the universe. So it
Okay.
rotates every 25,772 years. You divide that by 360 degrees, and you got 71.6 years for 1 degree.
And
So
of course,
in 6,000 years, 6,300 years, it moves 90 degrees.
okay, I got that. And actually,
So, but
during
you
our
know, they realized then that the North Star was off, and it kept moving from one part of the zodiac, to the other. 12 parts of the zodiac, it moved from one to the other, and the North Star would change every 2,100 years. We had a different North Star. But after you do that for 6,300 years, you have to shift the compass because everything has changed 90 degrees.
Yeah, that'd be a quarter turn around the great year.
Yeah.
And of course, we've talked about this too, Albert. And of course, I do a lot with it with astrology. But when I talk about the 1 degree change of the zodiac in the great year, I use 72 years, which is what 0.4 years off from what you're saying. And I also think that I think our solar system is not calibrated really quite correctly, and I think why it's not really a paradise right now. To be completely honest, I think I fully believe that the original system was based on 360, not 365. Based on base 12, and you got 72, 144. You got all the important numbers in there, and that's how astrology is structured. And also the ancient number system is structured with mostly base 12, sometimes 10, but usually 12, and 13's in there too. Okay, so I want to ask you about this. The devastation. There was also devastation in North America, correct?
Yes.
Was that from a comet before the one in Wales? Can you talk about what time period that was in?
It could have been at the same time because it hit, and there was a tidal wave like probably 3,000, 3,500 feet high. It hit the East Coast. It went all the way into the Appalachian Mountains and part down into the Tennessee Valley. And when the Delaware Indians was making their way east, they came out of the timbers, which was up in the northwest. And when they came down, they wanted to get out of the cold weather, and they wanted to move down where it's fertile and everything. That's when they run upon King Arthur's people, because he was east of the Mississippi. He controlled everything. But the Delaware wanted to get to the coast, and they asked him, could they get free passage through his land? But there were so many of them. I mean, tens to hundreds of thousands of them. And King Arthur told them if they passed through his land in small groups, 40 to or 100 to a group, and didn't kill too much game or didn't bother the crops, so that he would let them pass. But he was really tricking them because he planned on ambushing them, and which they did later. And when they did this, the Red Indians then wanted to go to war. So they went and got up these other 4 or 5 nations. I think there's 5 nations that attacked King Arthur. And at the time that they attacked, King Arthur was up at the Ohio River where they had the fortification, and the castle of Maddox was up there at Devil's Backbone. And when they said they was going to lose the fortifications up there and everything, King Arthur regrouped his people and went down the Ohio River to an island that he knew had swirl pools, or where water goes down under into caverns and everything. And he thought they'd be safe on that island. But the only trouble is the Delaware Indians, they knew the rivers and everything. They knew where the places were. So early that morning, they brought their canoes and everything and came in on the island. King Arthur and his people were sleeping, and they killed most of them while they slept. But King Arthur woke up and was able to get his war shields and swords, spears, whatever. And he went out and was fighting the Indians. He killed 20 braves. And this Indian chief, the chief's name was Chief Longbread. And after King Arthur, you see, Arthur was 74, 75 years old at the time, but he's still in good shape. After he done wrestled and fought down and killed 20 Indians, then the chief came up against him, and he was fresh, hadn't fought anybody. And him and Arthur fought for a long time, and then finally the chief got lucky and hit Arthur in the head with an axe, and it killed Arthur. And according to the description, he was had long blonde hair and blue eyes. Whether people believe that or not, that's what it said, you know, in Indian histories that I've read. The Wallamolam, you know, they call it a history Bible, but it's actually just history. And it
That's
has over,
Delaware. That's a
huh?
Delaware book, right, Albert?
Well, yeah, they've
Delaware
become
native.
the Delaware. At the time, they was called the lineage of Lenape.
Okay.
King Arthur had three large cities up at Ohio, and the center city was called Sandusky, which, you know, is Sandusky today. There was one on the left, right, and one in the center was Sandusky. And they was called like Wolf City and Eagle City and something like that. But they sent word out from there down to the Ohio River about the Lenny Lenape was killing all the game. They didn't have any game for winter for the people, and they were destroying the crops. So they sent a secret message with one of the warriors, young warrior, and they had to take small bows and arrows with them because they couldn't use the large ones. You know, large bows is for war, and the small ones just for game. And they had to paint certain things on their face showing that they was friendly and carrying a message. And they got the message down to Arthur, and that's when they all went to war then. That's when Arthur ended up getting killed. I think he was killed on Round Island above Sand Island, where most of the skeletons and bodies was found later by George Rogers Clark. He found thousands of bone fragments and everything still in the river. But it was a great war. Maddox, he survived. He survived that battle. And he was down on the Little Tennessee River. But they was fighting down there too. They was fighting all over Kentucky. And actually, they said it was the largest battle that has ever been fought on the North American continent, even larger than the Civil War. There was 500,000 killed in the Civil War. So it was a huge battle. And when the Lenny Lenape won, they told what survivors that was left of the white Indians, they called them King Arthur's people, that they had to go down the Mississippi River and never return. Well, when they went down the Mississippi, they got down to Missouri, and they went up the Missouri River, made settlements up in South Dakota, North Dakota, and they become the Mandan Indians, Mandan. And that's where the Lewis and Clark expedition went out there in 1803 and stayed that winter with them because President Thomas Jefferson wanted them to stay there and find out information about them because a lot of them was red-headed, you know, and a lot of them was blonde-headed and blue eyes and white skin. They couldn't figure it out, and Thomas Jefferson wanted to know why. Well, when they had the information gathered and they was making a return trip, right, 1805, 1806, Meriwether Lewis was killed down next to Kingsport, and the information never got to Thomas Jefferson. So somebody down there didn't want the information to get to President Jefferson, where he stayed at the inn, Meriwether Lewis, and he was killed there. I think sometimes, though, if somebody didn't want this information out, just like today, they don't want it out. But it's going to get out sooner or later.
Yeah, definitely. All the people who are doing podcasts now, I think you're doing a good job.
Well,
And
you know, people
we
says
have to
there's no
talk about it.
information that King Arthur came over here. They said there's no remains, there's none of this and that, you know, he wasn't here. But you take the 10,000 mounds that's in Ohio and all the other probably 100,000 mounds up and down to Mississippi and Ohio and Missouri rivers and everything. That shows they was here. That's what they did was build mounds. They
Oh,
built
I
one
got.
of yeah, go ahead.
Well, I want to comment on that too because I've done extensive research at the mounds, not just reading about it. But I've been to probably 20 or 30 or more of them across the Atlantic, Midwest and stuff, and then all the way to the east, even eastern Oklahoma and eastern Texas. And I have to say this, Albert. One of the first things when we started talking that, well, of course, you brought up Welsh in North America, and I know when to listen because I had never heard that before. And a couple years ago, and I knew it was important, and I wanted to see if I could make something of it. So before we ever talked about that, and I went out to these sites, there's a couple sites in particular I want to say one of them is kind of south central Ohio. So again, the same area that you're referencing. You know, I've been to some of these very large mounds, and they have. There's a couple of them at least, really more than a couple, but some have been eroded a lot. It's hard to see, you know, kind of the original outlines and things. But there are several. Oh no, I know where the other one was now. Oh, it was in. It's a good time to bring this up. It was actually in Etowah, Georgia, which would have been close to where Madoc would have been, you know, according to the story you're telling. And what's interesting about these two places I'm talking about is that there is a very clear ditch and embankment. You can call it a henge if you want. But the one in particular in Etowah looks like a moat. And there's still water that comes into that. And you can see it. I believe it's, must not be tidal because it's not on the ocean. But it kind of like ebbs and flows a little bit. And it looks very clearly like it was dug to be a moat. And when you think about moats, and not only that, behind it in the center of the complex, there's mounds that were said to be buried. And they go quite high up, so you get a good lookout. But it doesn't seem, to me, just based on what I've read and what I've seen in Native American culture, in particular North America, it doesn't feel fully Native American to me. But it does feel like something kind of a European influence from present-day UK, Ireland, you know, Scotland area, where you see those things, the mounds and the henges and the moats and everything. And there's actually one, I think, in Kentucky too that I don't know if you can visit it anymore. It might be on private land, but you see pictures of it, and you're saying, yeah, that's like you see the moat dug around the outside. You know, you got the fortifications in the middle, and then they've got this little kind of bridge going over the moat. And that's, to me, that's not really, not a fully Native American thing. Maybe I'm wrong, or maybe it came in and the Native Americans adopted it, which is what I think happened. But we're talking about cultures that are not from here, and we're talking way before 1492. And anyone who's paying attention to these types of information now, I think, will feel quite clear on that point that 1492 was not the first European contact in North America. It's the most ridiculous thing to claim that.
I was over here 900 years before that.
So he came over here, was it pretty much exclusively because of the destruction?
Yeah, they didn't, I mean, the crops wouldn't grow or anything because of, the climate.
Okay, however, I want to bring this up though too, because I believe that they believed that Avalon was the west. Is that correct?
Well, Avalon, they called us over here at one time like Avalon, but there was an Avalon in Wales.
Okay.
I got something off my screen here.
So I'm just thinking that I think they knew about this continent for a long time. I think most of the world knew about this continent since the beginning, really.
Well, Ham's people, in the Bible, his people was the Phoenicians. Well, they came over here. They come over here like 1790 BC. They was one that was mining copper up at Lake Michigan. I think millions of pounds of copper or tons of copper was mined up at Michigan. And they also mined out in Arizona. They could sail ships all the way up into Arizona at that time.
Okay, so Phoenicians.
Strength is, yeah.
Didn't they did a dating, Albert, I believe, on a lot of the Phoenician jewelry and stuff that got over to Europe, and I'm pretty sure it said it came from Michigan. Like they actually did an analysis, not a dating, but they did like a analysis on it, and you can.
Michigan copper.
Fairly high certainty. Good.
You can identify Michigan copper because it's got 5% silver in it.
Okay, and so that's what they found, probably, right?
Yeah, that's how they know when they found it. They even found some on ships sunk in the Mediterranean. Copper came from Michigan.
Okay, now this copper topic is very interesting because when I was in Michigan, it's actually one of the states I spent probably the least time in, but I've really enjoyed my time up there, especially it was very peaceful. What's interesting about this is that I went to when I was in Traverse City, which of course is where I not from, they're from Kingsford, Lee and their brothers for the Curse Folk Island television show, but they, a couple of them live in Traverse City now, which is a little further to the south. It's not on the Upper Peninsula, it's on the mainland of Michigan. So anyway, when I was in that town visiting, and I went to the vineyard, preached again, I was in Marvin's.
Sounds breaking up.
Oh, okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I went up to Maury Vineyards, and anyway, in Traverse City, there is a park, and in that park, there are pieces of copper that are the size of boulders.
Yeah,
and
tons.
It looks fake. It's unbelievable, man. I always reference this when I feel like something looks fake in the natural world. It looks like something from Disney World. You're literally walking through the park. There's a boulder that's taller than me, and it is completely like orangish copper color, orange reddish copper color. And then there's some like I guess gal around it. And sitting right there, massive boulder sitting right there.
Yeah, 95% copper when it comes out of the ground.
I encourage people to see that for themselves. Go check that out. Okay, very interesting. So when the Welsh got over, go ahead.
You sound quit.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Welsh, when they came over here, they weren't planning on being here, and then when they got here, what was the idea? Just to kind of set up another colony?
Yeah, well, down in Blandenburg, Kentucky, they found a stone down there. It has been translated by Alan Wilson. He's an expert on all that, and he just recently passed away. But it was like a constitution. It was where they was going to divide the land, separate, everybody gets everything equal. See, the governments today don't have everything equal for everybody. They always give the upper class, more than they do the lower class. Back then, everything was equal. And it was on that Brandenburg stone. It's in a museum in Kentucky. And then, the other rune stones, like the one up at Narragansett, which I descended from the Narragansett Indians on one branch of my family.
I've seen that stone too, Albert.
Yeah, I translated that one. And the two stones up at the Fletcher Bay and the Bayview Stone up at Yarmouth Bay, Nova Scotia. Those was carved by Maryland when he was taking King Arthur back home for burial. And then the other end of the story is picked up by St. David that lived 5 or 6 miles up the Iwani River. He had writings that he kept, and you can see those today. He seen a ship come in at the mouth of the Iwani River while he was sitting at the mouth of his cave, because his church and place that he lived, St. Anthony's Church, it was flattened by the comet and destroyed. So he went into living like a hermit in a cave. And he went down to meet those people on the ship, and it was Merlin and 6 of his fellow people. I got 2 of the other names of them. But they brought a body that was mummified. It'd been heated and everything, and then they put tree bark on it, wrapped it up in 3 white deer skin and everything, had his armor put on him, a gold armor and gold face mask. And they took him back home. And when he went down there, they told him that he couldn't tell anybody about who this person was, even though he knew who he was, but he couldn't say anything about it because it was King Arthur. If the people that still lived in Wales found out the king was dead, you'd have turmoil. Everybody be trying to take over. But the same thing happened when they renovated the St. Peter's Church. They had to renovate before they could take King Arthur out of the cave. He stayed in a tomb in the cave of St. David. When the church was renovated, they took Arthur up and buried him up at the church, whether in the church or in a boat-shaped anomaly outside the church. But he's buried up there. And I believe myself, he's in the church at the altar, because when you dedicate a church, you bury him at the altar, which is the Hamlin's position. And that's where they found his cross. A silver crucifix, like 2 pounds, 10 ounces of silver, had his name on it and everything. And the headstone that they had made for him and everything, it was in the wall of the church. Some guy over here in the United States has got that headstone now, and I don't know where the silver crucifix went to, but haven't heard anything about it since Alan died. But I think that's where he was buried, up there at St. Peter's Church at Chiropractic.
Okay, and that's in Wales, right, Albert?
Yeah. And see, Maryland took him back home. Maryland one carved those stones up there at Yarmouth Bay, and they had one of those stones on Curse of Oak Island. They said the other either was stolen or it never did exist, but I'm quite sure it existed because somebody made pencil drawings of it and everything, and it had 3 extra characters on it. And those 3 extra characters is a date, 579. He killed in 578. They kept him in a cave after they mummified him down in Kentucky. And I think me and you made a trip down there last year looking for the cave. But I found out lately that it's probably in, what was that, Menifee County? As a matter of fact, I got a picture I want to show you. You haven't even seen this. Let's see if I can get the light off of it.
Can you get a little closer, Albert? Just a little bit. That's pretty. Actually, that's good. That's good. Hold that. Hold that.
See what that looks like?
Well, I'm not sure the perspective, but go ahead. Something
looks
interesting.
Looks like a dragon head, don't it?
Yeah, I can kind of see that. Yeah.
Arthur Pendragon. That's
So
outside.
what is that?
That's outside the cave where they kept him for the winter of 578. And then Merle and 6 others took him down the Kentucky River to the Ohio River and down the Mississippi River, the Gulf of Mexico, around Florida, and up to Yarmouth Bay, Nova Scotia. And then he carved those 2 stones, and those 2 carvings says that he was taking off, going back home with the ruler in a sack in the bottom of a boat like a fish, which was King Arthur, taking his ruler back home.
And then he was buried in Wales.
Yeah, eventually up at St. Peter's Church. But like I said, the church had been knocked down by the comet and they hadn't been completely rebuilt. And they waited till it was renovated the fall of 579, and they took him up and buried him up there. And that's when Madoc's son, Morgan, became king in King Arthur's place. Well, King Arthur had a brother that disagreed with Morgan being king, and his name was Froic, F-R-O-I-C. And he didn't want Morgan to be king, so Morgan had him killed. That's the way they did back then. They killed father, son, mother, daughter. It didn't matter, just as long as they could, stay king. But he killed King Arthur's brother.
So when you say King Arthur, Albert, you're talking about King Arthur II is what you're really referring to, right? Okay. Now tell me about King Arthur I.
Well, he was one that there was an emperor ruler and everything, Maximus, and he had a son named Uther, which was Victor, and Uther Pendragon. That's Arthur and his father and his grandfather. They was the 3 sons, grandfather, son, and grandson of Victor. And Victor's dad was Magnus Maximus, which was a ruler of Rome, one of the generals. And King Arthur I, he conquered all of Europe and was on his way, and I think he went into Italy. And he tried to go into another country, and that's when he was killed. But it was like 4 generations before Arthur II became king.
Okay. Now, how many years would that be? What are we talking about for a time frame?
Well, they usually served like 30 or 40 years as king. I think King Arthur's dad, Mary, which was Maurice, he served for 30 years, and King Arthur was like 30 years. And then their dad, Tudoridge, he was 30 years. So they averaged about 30 years, most of them. So it'd been probably 150 years between King Arthur I and King Arthur II.
All right, so the 400s AD?
Well, it was 200 and some AD when King Arthur was fighting all over and down into Italy and everywhere. And about either 238 or 283, I can't remember which. But then 150 to 200 years later, Arthur was born in 503 and died in 578. Okay. But they have created so much of a myth just because those two authors, they combined both authors together as one. One fought the Anglos, the Saxons, and one fought the Romans. Well, the Romans had done left when King Arthur II took over, so he was fighting against the Saxons. But the Arthur I was fighting in Europe. He was killed somewhere or another after he left Italy. King Arthur II was over fighting, and that's when he found out that his half brother or his nephew, Mordred, he was trying to take over the kingdom while he was in France fighting. And he tried to take King Arthur's wife, took his castles and everything else, and trying to rule everything himself. So King Arthur had to leave his army fighting and take some of his men with him and go back to Wales, and then he had to fight Mordred. I think that was the Battle of Badon. And King Arthur carried the cross of Jesus around on his shoulders for 3 days and 3 nights, praying that he could win that battle, and he did win. He was almost mortally wounded, and Mordred was mortally wounded. He was killed. And while King Arthur was off to Avalon to get well, which is like a place of rest, they call it like the spiritual people where they stay there. I think it was his sister that nursed him back to health. But he had to do one thing before he could ever get his strength back. He had to get rid of the sword, Excalibur. He couldn't keep it anymore after that. To get well, he had to get rid of Excalibur. So he had Lancelot take it up to the Lady of the Lake and toss it into the lake. And he wanted Lancelot to tell him what the Lady of the Lake told him. Well, Lancelot tried to trick him 2 times. He didn't throw it in because he wanted to keep it. And the 3rd time he throwed it in, he come back and told King Arthur that he was going to be well. And that's when he got back to health and fought a few more battles. He fought 62 battles, never lost a one. And until he came over here and he was betrayed by one of his Indian friends.
Okay, so you're talking about Morgana in terms of his half-sister who nursed him back to health, right? Yeah,
Morgana, yeah.
Okay, in some of the accounts, she's described as the Lady of the Lake. There's actually several people who are described that way. And I found it's fascinating, it's interesting, it reminds me a lot also of some of the Greek mythology that I studied back in 2006 when I was in college, in the way that, like, you have multiple stories where people are different people, they have different relations, things end differently, and you end up basically having this, at least for me, saying, I don't know which one it was. It could have been, if you're willing to account for metaphysics and alternate dimensions, it could have been all of them. I know a lot of people don't go there. I definitely do go there. After I've all kind of data points, and so I think it's important, especially when we're trying to discover things and be able to try to provide better information about what actually happened in history, to stay as open-minded as possible. You never know what you're going to find. And I believe in divine guidance. I think you do too, Albert, meaning that, like, we'll be led to where we need to be led to at the right time. And yeah. So what I say first for myself, what I say is so if I really want something to happen for me, but it's not in the best interest of most of the people I'm associated with, then I really don't need it to happen. I take the cue from God at that point, and I ask for the vision, and I ask for the correct steps to take, and then all I have to do is start walking. And I'm not going to be led somewhere that's going to hurt people for no reason. It's ridiculous. So I think we need to pay attention to that divine guidance as well.
I'm going to show you a photo of that stone that's found under Maddox's head.
Okay.
If you can see it.
Yeah, hold it right there, Albert. Okay.
And
It's
he
a very
shows
interesting color.
two marks up at the top.
Which side?
I think this side.
Okay.
It's on my right, probably your left. I don't know.
Okay.
But those two marks was added after it was found. Somebody put those on there, and when Alan translated, he translated, of course, as the ruler. Those two marks either means the ruler or it means God. And Alan translated as the ruler, Maddox, he distinctly is, which, you have to reverse it from the way the Welsh talk. That you'd say he distinctly is Maddox, the ruler. But the ruler wasn't on the stone when it was put there. But I do believe he was a ruler, though, because there's been a stone found in Oklahoma called the Shawnee Stone. It's got his name on it. That stone says Maddox. And last year, another stone was found in Central Florida. It came out of a phosphate mine, and it had the name of Maddox on it, just like the Shawnee Stone. I tried to buy it, but the lady wouldn't sell it. And I don't know what happened to her. She's not on Facebook anymore. I would have loved to have bought that stone.
Was she not selling it to anyone, or what was the story behind that?
No, she wouldn't sell it to anyone. She thought it was a hobo stone. That's what she called it. And
Okay.
when I seen it called a hobo stone, I figured, I could try to purchase it. I offered more than it was worth. She still wouldn't sell it. But she still has it. I know her name and everything, If it ever comes back up for sale, maybe we can purchase it or something. But if his name was in Florida, his name was in Oklahoma, and his name was in Tennessee, it showed he had a far-reaching power. And I've also found out since then that ruler down in South America, what was the ruler they worshiped down there?
Which part of South America?
I can't remember the one that the ruler they called it started with a O something.
Well, I mean, it's not
Maddox. He was Maddox too, so he ruled down to Yucatan too.
Are you talking about the Olmec?
Yeah, well, the name of the ruler, not the Olmec language.
Oh, okay. I'd be interested in if you find that, Albert, who that was, because I have a lot of reference points for Central America and in South America too.
He was the ruler down there too, and Panama, up and down Mexico, all the way out to Arizona. He was the ruler out there, and 12 of his sons ruled in Mexico. You remember the Tucson artifacts?
Yes, I believe so. Yep.
Was it Cataleas? Well, 12 of his sons ruled there, consecutive sons, from like 700 up to around 1200. And somehow or another, they wiped out, disappeared. I think the Indians, like I said, Indians from the south came up against them. I don't know who that could have been. It wouldn't have, maybe the Incas or something like that.
Okay, very interesting.
But they ended up disappearing. They found those lead artifacts out there, and they had the dates on the names of the rulers, and all those were descendants of Maddox.
So he had a large influence, in other words, right?
Yeah, he ruled all of Canada, Nova Scotia, upper New England, all the way out to Montana, Arizona, down into Mexico and Yucatan.
So then what ended up happening, Albert? Just the kingdom dissolved, and then suddenly, like, the history was lost? If it was such a vast empire,
Yeah. But, I mean, there's stuff out there. This here was the swords and everything and made out of lead was under, like, calcite or something. That was, it takes thousands of years to form, or hundreds of years anyway. And the people said all those artifacts was fake. There's no way they could be fake under rock that had formed over top of it. It's just like those mounds. They put clay over top of the mounds, like 2 foot thick. And if that mound had been disturbed, you could see where they dug through the clay. But the archaeologists record at Maddox tomb that the clay had not been disturbed. And then the brass bracelets date back to 200 AD. Now, Max could have got those from one of his ancestors, or stuff like that. They would keep probably for hundreds of years anyway. But they was on his wrist, and the latest that they could have been made was 200 AD. And how did he get in that mound?
The latest, okay. Yeah, there's I spent a lot of time doing research in the Southwest this past summer, and there's some things down there that are more than a couple, actually. There's a lot of Irish or early Germanic tribe influence or whatever, all down in the Southwest United States and even Central America. And it's a weird thing because some of the
the mic's breaking up. Can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Nope.
If we look, guys,
Are you going to be able to come back?
Hey, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still.
All right, well, let's try this one more minute, see if we can make it work. Anyway, did you hear what I was saying about the Southwest, that there's indications of some of the symbols? It look like they're swirls or vortexes or whirls, and in some of the area you see that is on the west coast of France, and certainly through Ireland and everything. And there's also something really weird that I saw. I was doing research on the kivas in the Southwest, which are basically underground sort of stone-walled chambers that they have the religious services and ceremonies in, get closer to the earth. And then also, I think a lot of people think they were covered at one point. And they're open to the air now, but they used to not be. But it's very interesting because down in the kivas, you have like the air that comes in for the fire and everything, but you have something else in there, and it literally looks like a standing stone right in the middle of the kiva. It kind of, they're saying it's something to prevent the wind from coming into the kiva when it hits the ground, descending from above or whatever, which I don't doubt, but it looks exactly like a standing stone. And it's really hard, and I got the feeling from that's what it was, or that's where the influence came from. So when you're talking about the Southwest, certainly for me, there's plenty of evidence down there that there's cultures that were maybe not native to there that came over there and influenced the people. Very interesting.
Yeah, you take when those people came over here, like when King Solomon built his temple, but all those people came out of Egypt with Moses and everything. They didn't believe in what King Solomon was doing, so they all up and left. And they'd already knew the route over here because of the copper mine and everything, and gold and silver for King Solomon. So they came over here and they stayed in upstate New York, pretty well the same area where the Knights Templars made their first settlement. And the reason they made their settlement probably there first is because there was people there that they could talk to and, you know, already had lived there for hundreds of years. But they had came over when King Solomon's temple had started being built. And they worshiped the goddess Venus, Ashura, or what do you call it, Minerva, Athena. They all mean the same thing, which is the Queen of Heaven, Cassiopeia or Eve. Because that's when they think man, you know, was in the constellation Cassiopeia, because Adam was in the constellation before that. And then when it went over into the next constellations, when Cain and Abel was born, that would be Cygnus. One was on the left side of the cross and one was on the right side. And when they said Cain killed Abel, Cain was on the right-hand side of Cygnus and Abel was on the left. Well, Abel, after 1,000 years as a North Star, it wasn't as bright as Cain was. So Cain became the North Star for 3,000 years instead of 2. And Cain was only 1,000. But, I mean, the Bible goes along with things that happened in the heavens as well as here on earth. And you just have to figure out the stories and everything. It's like the Ice Age. The Ice Age happened during the twins, Gemini the twins. And the Egyptian pyramids was built in Leo. It's like Moses was in Taurus, the bull. You know, worship of the bull and all that. That was in Taurus. And then we went over into Aries. And at the end of Aries, just before we went over into Pisces, is when Jesus was born. And I have a feeling
Pisces is the fish.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus is associated with the fish.
That's what we live in now. Well, if you take the Declaration of Independence, if you look at it and study it, this came off of a site where I've been studying for 5 or 6 years on it. That guy really has some stuff. But if you look at the A in America on the Declaration of Independence, it's not an A. It's a sign of Pisces. Thomas Jefferson put that on there so they would know that a declaration was made during the time of Pisces, you know, the 2160 years of Pisces. And we're getting close to the end of Pisces now, getting ready to enter into Aquarius, which is possibly when the flood occurred, you know, the deluge. So we're getting pretty close to that again. And
when do you think Aquarius starts, Albert?
Probably another 100, 120 years from now.
Okay.
And then we'll start back over after Aquarius and go back into the Adam, Capheus. And then we'll start back over again, Cassiopeia and Cygnus and on around. Just like the Zodiac, 12 signs of the Zodiac, and the 12 children of Jacob.
Which is the story of Israel, of course. 12 tribes.
Yeah. Well, see, in the history that I've been reading a long time ago, man seen all this going on. He wrote it down. So he had to be there. And Jupiter came in as a rogue planet, entered into our solar system, and it created havoc. It's what made the asteroid belt. That planet was destroyed there. I think it was Theban. Some people call it Isis. But it pulled a moon away from Theban, and the moon was traveling faster than the planet in its orbit at that time, and it caught back up with Theban and exploded it. And at that time, man was traveling between Theban and Mars and the Earth, and 2 moons were stripped away from Uranus, and I think that was Venus and Mercury. They was traveling rogue in their solar system too, till the sun, they call it EY or EA, you know, where Earth got its name. And it finally got them in the orbit, but at one time, Venus had a tail behind it like a comet, and it almost hit Mars head on. And that's probably what destroyed the water and everything on Mars. But we need to do that for now.
Okay, so when you say they escaped Uranus, Albert, are you talking about Uranus, or was it part of the planet Uranus, or how does that work?
Well, some of the planet Theban crashed into Earth and caused a deluge. That was the red planet they called Theban. And 3 large chunks of it landed down next to the Gulf of Mexico off the Yucatan Peninsula, and you can see where they sunk up into the Atlantic Ocean. That's probably when Atlantis sank. But they sunk up 17,500 feet in the ocean floor. It's 3.5 miles. You can see it on Google Earth.
That was pieces of the fall, right?
Yeah, it's from that planet that was exploded when the moon caught up with it in the asteroid belt. Some of the moons around Saturn was destroyed at the same time and became the rings of Saturn. If you read it right, like Saturn is like Isaac or Jacob, and then Jupiter is the sun because it came in, into our solar system. And that's where the 12 sons came in. There was Jacob. Israel become Jacob. I don't know. I've just looked at that so long. It's just like when, Peter, when he denied Christ 3 times in the Bible, it's really not talking about that particular thing at the time. The 3 denials is representing the 3, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. And when Peter denied him 3 times, if you read on down further, it talks about where he told him to throw the net over the side of the boat and caught 153 fish. Well, 153 fish is the width of the Christian fish. When 2 circles intersect, that's the width. The smallest width you can get is 153, and the height is 265.
That's the Vesica Pisces, right?
Yeah, you divide 153 into 265 and then square it, and that's the closest number you'll get to 3. You can try 152 or you can try 154, but it won't work. You got to have 153. So that's why 153 fish, and that's why the 3 denials is telling you about the Christian fish. But they tell it in a way that it's like Peter's denying Jesus 3 times.
Let me, I want to comment on that too, Albert, but tell me really quickly again, you said the 12 sons who were they in the sky? 12 sons of Jacob, who were they in the sky?
Yeah, they were the zodiac.
But who were they in the, oh, okay, the 12 constellations you're saying.
Well, yeah, and just like the 12 apostles of Jesus,
Right.
Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4 gospels. If you place them in the heavens, like the Bible tells you, where one of them is Taurus the bull, one of them is Leo the lion, one of them is Aquarius, and I think the other is like Scorpio or something like that. But when you put those in the heavens, it forms a cross on the earth. And as long as those 4 stars is in that position, the earth is safe from all these asteroids and comets. But once those shift, it shows that the tilt of the earth has shifted. It's like safeguards over the earth, as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
It's very interesting. So you're saying that the 12 constellations.
Sound went out.
Okay. So you're saying that sons were born out of the planet Saturn? Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's as above, so below. It's just like the 7 churches in the Revelation. If you lay and plot them out on the ground, and then you also lay out Patmos, where John, wrote the Revelation, that will give you the year that the Revelation was wrote. And it wasn't wrote when people think it was. It was like 5,900 years ago.
Okay, a lot older.
Yeah. And then, they could be even older than that. It depends on how you can calculate how many times the universe has rotated, once or twice or 50 times.
When are the events of Revelation supposed to take place in your mind?
I have a feeling within a few years.
And so that would have been written almost 6,000 years ago or more, talking about the current age and the current time that we're in.
Well, I'll tell you something even more surprising than that. The 5 books that Moses wrote?
Yeah, first 5 books of the Bible, right?
You take Genesis, and this is on that website I was telling you about where I've been studying. Chasing the Ark of God. You might be able to find a link for that and put it up sometime for somebody. But in that Chasing the Ark of God, I forgot the train of thought now where I was at.
Talking about the website in relation to talking astrotheology, but about Revelation, of course.
Now, something I told you about. Oh yeah, with the 5 books.
Yeah, first 5 books, right?
Take the first chapter of Genesis. You know, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Take the first 65 letters, put them in rows of 13, 5 rows, and you'll see Noah's coming from left to bottom, diagonal. And across the other way, you'll have the first letter is missing, you'll have RUTH. So you have to go over to the book of John that starts the same way as Genesis in the beginning. And you have to take where it says in the beginning, that's what you have to do. You have to take in and put it in front of beginning. You take them out. And when you do that, you end up with the other letter. You end up with truth and Noah's. Noah's where the A is and truth where the U is where they crisscross. Well, AU, is the symbol for gold. All right. And the letters in top of the cup adds up to 77, and Christ adds up to 77. So you got Christ gold cup. And that's the gold cup that they've been looking for. It's a literal gold cup instead of a physical one. And you take those letters, 77 for Christ, that gives you the longitude of Washington, D.C. And the bottom of the cup, down on the bottom, it says INWADC in Washington, D.C. Now, how in the world could the Holy Grail in Washington, D.C. be wrote 6,000 years ago? And, I mean, George Washington hadn't even been born. Washington hadn't been thought of. So it shows that God had influence on what was wrote.
Oh, absolutely. Well, according to the way that I teach things too, it's all on a cosmic timeline. And I just want to encourage people who, if you happen to be religious or you happen to be Christian, you're watching the show right now, it doesn't have to negate your faith. And that's one of the really important things that I like to make sure people understand, because you can still believe in Christ if we're talking about Christianity, and things in the sky can line up perfectly with that story. I mean, as has been taught in the ancient world, it is as above, so below. So let's just say if, whoever you want to define God as, maybe some people watching this don't believe in God. But the thing is that whoever created all of this, if it was one person, maybe it wasn't one person, but if it was one person and we call that person God, it can be created to any specification that that person wants to create it to. And so if God wanted to match up the planets, all the events in the sky, to a man named Jesus Christ on earth, he can absolutely do that. And it doesn't have to mean that you have to, get rid of your faith or something like that. When I start talking about astrology, and I'm very pro-Christ. People know that I've watched my show. But when I start talking about astrology, some people think that, maybe he's not as Christian as he's saying he is. But actually, all it is you're following science and you're following the data. And whoever created this solar system created it with a very specific pattern. And all we're doing is identifying that pattern.
I believe myself. I mean, I believe when God does anything, he does it through Jesus, because Jesus is the way that things are getting done and gets done, because Jesus is in every spirit and in every person. It's just like when when the astronauts landed on the moon. You take Neil Armstrong, when they went to the moon, 69. Well, the ship that they landed on the moon was called the Eagle, right? Because it said the Eagle has landed. All right, the ship that was going around the moon was called the Columbia. All right, if you look up Columbia, you'll end up with the spirit of 76, because the letters in Columbia adds up to 76. So the Columbia ends up being the Holy Ghost. And then you take the Eagle has landed. All right, Eagle starts with an E and ends with an E, and it's 5 letters. E is the 5th letter of the alphabet. So you got 555. And if you take the first letter, 555, it's a sixth letter. It's 666. Now, people think that's a bad number because in the Bible, it talks about the beast and all that. But it don't say it's a number of the beast. It says it's a number of a man. So what is the whole Bible wrote about is man, is Jesus. The number represents Jesus. It don't represent the beast or the devil. And then there's another number. The 13, like the Knights Templars killed on Friday the 13th, they look at that as a bad number too. But the only way you can find the Ark of the Covenant is use 13 and 666. And that's on that website I was telling you about, Chasing the Ark of God.
The 666 too, Albert, is it's also the way I teach it. It's also a middle point, which means if you start with the 3 it's showing the and these are all sacred numbers. It's just the middle third of this. Call it the Trinity, call it whatever you want. But the other thing that's interesting is that you say 666 is the number of man. Well, what is man? We say man, human. What are we composed of mostly? Carbon. And the chemical makeup of carbon is 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and 6 electrons.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's when I heard that one about 10 years ago. That again, it doesn't destroy that I have. It actually strengthens it because it's showing me that there's a pattern. And that's before we jump in again, is that when you're talking about symbols, you're talking about numbers, you're talking about esotericism and all this stuff. At the end of the day, it's really how you want to define what that means to you. And that's one of the ways that we have one thing ending up meaning 20 or 30 different things, and some are good and some are not good, because everyone takes it and they do what they want with it. So I think what's important is we have to identify which one that we actually identify with ourselves and then put our energy behind that. That's my belief.
Well, it's like everybody, is trying to search for the Ark of the Covenant. You go to that website I told you about, and he tells you where the Ark of the Covenant is. He tells you why it's there, he tells you how it's there, and they laid a roadmap show them where it's at through George Washington and Washington, D.C. When Washington, D.C. was formed, they took the land from Virginia and Maryland. And Virginia, you take the first 6 letters, you got Virgin. And in Maryland, you take the first 4 letters, Virgin Mary. So Washington actually is the city of Jesus. You take all the streets in Washington, D.C., and you can add the letters up this way and that way, and all of it points to Mount Vernon, where the Ark of the Covenant is, in George Washington's tomb.
All right, so do you think that Jesus lived in Washington, D.C. as well at some point, or was named after him?
Well, I think he did come over here.
Was that after he resurrected?
Well, I don't think he ever was died. I think he survived because he's buried in Wales. I mean, we shouldn't get into all that, but it really throws a lot of people off on religion. But I got photographs where his grave is, and I hope to go there someday.
Okay, but the very baseline, though, you do believe that he did have children. He has a lineage, right?
Yeah.
And the Welsh kings descend from that lineage, I believe is what you say, right?
Yeah, well, you take Nicholas Poussin, his paintings and everything, like the Deluge and everything, the painting I have hanging down in the living room. It shows that Jesus and Mary Magdalene coming into Wales, and she's handing up a baby to Jesus out of the boat. And in the water, there's a man on a donkey, which represents Jesus. Up in the upper right-hand side, you have the pyramids of Egypt, and over in the left-hand side, you got the Noah's Ark. I mean, it's all in that painting if you just look for it.
So, Albert, tell me, I actually just watched the Vinci Code. Really interesting. I mean, whether you have faith or not, it's a good movie. I think it's a good movie. But the idea is that the Grail is her. So can you tell me about that?
About Mary Magdalene?
Yeah.
Well, she was son of the daughter of Judah II and Cleopatra IV. which was a granddaughter of Cleopatra and St. Anthony. But she was like a princess of Nubia, Mumba.
Oh, in Africa?
Yeah, that's where her father ruled and everything, and her mother, Cleopatra and Juba II. She left there one time and went to like Greece, and that's when she was fell in love with a Roman soldier, and they went from there to Jerusalem. That's when she was, they say, dancing, in bars and everything else, but none of that ended up being true about her. That's the reason why Jesus said her sins was forgiven, because she hadn't really committed any, because she hadn't slept with any of them.
Okay, so
But,
who was trying to slander her? That's what I'm trying to understand. What faction was that?
The Sadducees and the Pharisees, the one that believes in the 5 books of Moses and nothing else. And one of them don't believe in the resurrection, the other did. But I don't know. We shouldn't get into all this religion, though, because we need to do that on another show.
Yeah, sure. It's a very, very interesting topic, though. All right,
Yes,
so let's see. Yep. All right, so we got about 20 minutes left, Albert. What should we talk about in relationship to North America that we haven't touched on?
Well, the Knights Templars treasures that came over here, I know for a fact that they came over here, and I got information. I can prove that the Cremona document was real when Ralph de Sudley came over here, 1178 to 1180. And the maps is real that he drawed. There was 4 of them in the Cremona document. They showed only one of them on the Oak Island show, but there's 4 of them. And they have treasures that's on that map. They also have the Newport Tower, which they say was a windmill for Benedict Arnold, the Arnold family, which is untrue. The Knights Templars built it between about 1370 and 1400, and it was an observatory. The 4 windows on it is for the seasons of the year. When the light shines through a window, another season started. And it's nothing but an observatory. It probably had a roof on it at one time. And all those maps is true and everything about the treasures that they brought over here. And I got maps from Diana Muir, it shows where treasures was buried. Some of them has been recovered, like the ones in Mahone Bay. That was recovered. Even the half ship load that they didn't get in 1770, they went back and got it. I'm quite sure they did, because that's all that construction work that happened in Smith's Cove. That was to get that treasure out of there. So those 6 treasures out of 7 was recovered. The only ones left is up at St. Lawrence River that way. But that wasn't their only treasures, like I said, he brought over here. See, Henry Sinclair's dad, he made 6 trips over here himself. And then his grandfather made trips over here. His first trip was in 1314 after the Battle of Bannockburn, when Scotland, won its freedom from King Edward III, I think, or II. And King Arthur II was, let's see, I don't forgot where I was going.
You said Bannockburn coming over here.
Yeah, well, he came over in 1314 and brought Knights Templars and treasures over, and he probably made 3 or 4 trips. There's no record of how many he made, but we know he made one in 1314. Then his son, which was Prince Henry Sinclair's dad, he made 6 trips. They say there's 4 trips of Prince Henry, but I've only know 3 that's been recorded. They say he made 4. And that wasn't the only treasures that was brought over, though. See, there was more in the journals that was written in the Old English. And the people that recovered the treasures, the Freemasons in 1770 that recovered them, they couldn't read the Old English. So they didn't know there was any more treasures. But in the 17th century, they sent 8 large ships over here with treasures on them. And those ships held twice as much as Prince Henry's ships held. So that's like 16 ship loads. And 7 they used to fight the Revolutionary War. So those ship loads, they haven't been recovered. They're still over here. And when they brought those over, there was 4 ship loads that was in Kilwinning Abbey in eastern Scotland. The other 4 shiploads, they had to go to France and pick them up. That's the treasures, it left, what was that, La Rochelle.
Yep, on the coast of France. Yep.
Remember, they said some of them left on horses and everything, and some left on the 18 ship. Well, those treasures went to Laon, France, Laon, not Loan, but Laon. They was kept in an abbey there. So when they brought those treasures over in the 17th century, they had to go pick up 4 shiploads from Laon, France, and they put that with the other at Kilwinning Abbey. And they was like 50 or 60 years getting it all together. And something called the behemoth, something that was large, was kept at Weymouth Caves in the Cave of Thieves. And there's even carvings on the wall there. It has a carving that looks like Nolan's cross on that wall. And I think it's the Caves of Thieves where it's at. But anyway, they brought those treasures over, and they met with the Micmac on the island of Skye. And Micmacs told them that the English and the French had moved in real heavy in Nova Scotia. And they told them, well, so we're not going to bury, these treasures. It's not going to go to Nova Scotia. We're going to take them somewhere else. And Micmac told them that the other treasures that Prince Henry had brought over were still safe because, they hadn't been recovered at that time. It was like 100 years later they recovered them. But they went up to St. Lawrence River with those 8 shiploads, and they went as far out west as Wyoming and Montana. Went all the way through the lakes and everywhere, and they buried it on the way out. And all of it's still there, really, unless somebody's looked up and found some of it.
Okay, so what would be great is if there's a recovery sometime soon, right?
Yeah, well, I have some pictures here of a couple Knights Templar coins that was found in Minnesota by Diana's brother. And I have a couple here that I have, and it's got to be close to where they unloaded the treasures and everything, because they had to cross the river and everything out in Minnesota. It's got to be there somewhere. They took it behind an Indian village, and the Indians said they'd protect it and take care of it. And they gave them 4 carts and horses to go up to Lake Superior to bring the treasure down. And they put a half a shipload of treasure there. Then they had another shipload that was left over. They took the carts and horses and went way out west for it and buried it. They crossed the Mandan village on the Missouri River. And they went 2 or 3 days past there, and I didn't keep track of them after that. I couldn't find where they went. But I do believe I can find it.
I broke up. I believe the Mandan are connected to the tribe of Dan. Do you find that accurate?
Yeah, they actually was the Shura. They're the ones that worship Venus and everything, and they was people up in New York, up Hunter Mountain up there. They was the ones that came over, and that was another branch of them that had went down into the Ohio Valley, because they was mentioning them down there when Sir Ralph DeSutter came over, that there was another branch, southwest of them. And that they worshiped different because the Kohan came over with Jesus and Joseph Bar Mithia and them in about 44 AD into New York, same place where their Shura was. And the Kohan that was with them, of course, the Kohan was one that took care of the Ark of the Covenant. They was Aaron's people, the one that did nothing but take care of the Ark of the Covenant. Moses' people was the one that protected the Ark of the Covenant. So the Kohan, if they came over, it only seems right to me that the Ark of the Covenant came with them, because they wouldn't have stayed here without the Ark of the Covenant. And they was in a valley up in New York near Hunter's Mountain. But that don't mean the Ark's there. It could be somewhere else, since they did go west,
Yeah, definitely.
But I think the Ark of the Covenant, like I say, is in Washington, D.C.
And so, how do we proceed into the future here? What would you like to see in terms of recoveries and telling the truth, exposing some things that have been concealed?
Well, the way our country's going right now, I don't think the treasury is going to help them any.
So
But
we need some kind of a supernatural intervention, in other
yeah,
words,
there's
right?
got to be something. There's got to be something happen to change everything. And then these treasures will be covered, and the Ark of the Covenant will be brought out.
So
It
what was the purpose of the Ark of the Covenant?
it was a way to communicate with God, and He could do things for him through it. I think when they wrote the Declaration of Independence and when they were signing it, I think the Ark of the Covenant was there. And I think it was also under the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. when the British came over and burned, the Capitol, 1812, 1814.
Yep.
All right, when they built the Capitol back, you notice they built a rotunda where the old House of Government used to be, and the House on one side and the Senate on the other side. And they laid the dignitaries out in the rotunda. Well, the reason I figured they laid the presidents out there and famous people is because the Ark of the Covenant rested there at one time.
Right at the ground level or below ground?
Below ground.
Okay.
Because somehow it escaped, the fire when it, either, what's her name, Dolly Madison, she was wanting to save most of the artifacts and everything of our government, the Declaration, the Constitution, all those things, famous portraits and paintings. She saved all that before it was burned. And most likely she either saved the Ark of the Covenant or either it was in a place where it couldn't be touched. But later it was moved because George Washington died in 1799. And the Ark of the Covenant was moved to his tomb in 1837. That's when George Washington was moved to the tomb, was 1837. So it took him 38 years to build that tomb. Nowhere in the world it should have took that long to build a tomb. And
that's a long time, yeah.
Well, you take 1837, if you multiply 18 times 37, you end up with 666, which is the number of Jesus. And George Washington himself, he had a certain amount of days to die, and he died on the first day of that. So he knew when he was going to die. And actually, there was 3 master masons that was his doctors at the time he died, and all 3 of those bled him to death after his servant had already bled him.
So you're saying he was killed then?
Well, it was a planned killing. I mean, he planned it. He knew he was going to die. He went out riding all that day before in the cold without any protection, coats, or anything else, and that's when he caught pneumonia and got sick. But he knew.
All right. So why did they want to remove him? What was the purpose behind that?
It was to hide the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay. Now here's my question: is who was George Washington? What was his lineage? Why was he the first? Well, he actually wasn't the first president, right? There were people before him.
Yeah, there's like 7 provincial presidents before him. It sat over the meetings and everything that they had. I think Sinclair. I think he was one of the General Sinclair. He was one of the provisional presidents. And
okay, so Washington himself, did he have royal lineage? He must have had some.
And I don't really know. I haven't really checked into it, but I know he had a certain amount of days he had to die to cover up everything so it all would come up 666. And when they locked the inner sanctuary after they put the remains of his family out of the other family tomb into that new tomb that was built, George Washington and Martha was buried on the outside. They locked the door on the inner sanctuary and they threw the key in the Potomac River. And the key that fits the door is Charlemagne, the key of Charlemagne. That's what you got to have to open the door. It's got 5 holes with like 8 dots around a center circle, There's 5 of them, and you got to have the key of Charlemagne to open it.
Very, very interesting.
Or some other means. But that key was thrown in Potomac River. I've got a newspaper clipping on it.
Was that supposed to be an original key from history, or was it a replica?
I think it was a key they made somehow. Yeah.
Okay.
And I also think of those treasures that was recovered, up at the islands up there, the treasures that what wasn't used for the Revolutionary War. I think it's in that tomb too. Because they had to go somewhere, and they sure didn't stay on Mason's Island, I don't think. That's where they took all the treasures to. It was covered. It was on Mason's Island.
That's relatively close to Mount Vernon.
Yeah. I have a feeling though they had the Ark of the Covenant. It had to be there, and it's in the vault too. Because the Washington Monument and the streets and everything in Washington D.C. they all add up to 666, and they all are verified by the Jesus number, like 77, 74 for Christ and Jesus. But you take the Washington Monument, 555 feet, like 8 inches or something else. But there again, and you got 555 and 666. And then
one of the things I found, Albert, one of the things I found is that when I look through history is that whether it was a conscious decision or not, things always ended up how they ended up. Like I believe in a cosmic timeline. So even if the person is not necessarily aware, I want to make this like this and it has to happen at this date, that does happen. But there are a lot of times I think it also is not like a conscious decision. It's that's been engineered from the beginning to happen at that time. Of course, it's going to match cosmic numerology,
Well, you take that lightning rod, it's in the top of the Washington Monument. They was going to make it out of white gold, I think, at one time. They decided on aluminum, which was a new product at that time. And in 1880s, I think it was, when they put the lightning rod up there. But they made it out of aluminum. And in height, it's 8.88 inches. And 888 is Jesus in Greek. And the base of it is 5.55 on all four bottom sides. And that's 666 adds up to Jesus. And then there's like a 13 in the writing around the sides of it, where it's got 1 and then 3, it's 13. Then you take aluminum, add the A and the L, it's 13. And then the atomic weight of aluminum is 13. But if you go 13 miles, 13 degrees southwest, it'll take you right to the tomb of George Washington.
Back to Mount Vernon again.
And it goes right by the Alexander Masonic Lodge.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting.
And I always wonder if that Ark of the Covenant is on display there at the Alexander Lodge, if it's the real Ark of the Covenant or not. You want to have a picture on my website?
Yeah, there could have been many copies. I think we probably agree there were a lot of copies of Albert.
That's just like that zero with the dot, that stone up at Oak Island. That's the symbol for Ark of the Covenant.
Which one is the HO stone?
Yeah, the one they say is gold.
Yeah.
It's also a symbol for the Ark of the Covenant. And you take the H and put it over top of the O, and you have the two handles that you carry the Ark of the Covenant with.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. I can definitely see that. Okay. Well, I think we're coming up on the end of the show, Albert. And I really appreciate it. This was fantastic. I scared
everything out too far. Probably I should have kept it all with the Templars.
No, it's fine. Any good topic is appropriate for the show. But me and Albert are talking about possibly doing a series on ancient history and ancient America and whatever else we want to talk about coming up later in the year. So be on the lookout for that, guys. Do you have any final remarks, Albert? Any closing statements you'd like to make?
No, I just like to recover one of these treasures to make sure and prove that everything is real, that it actually happened. There's so many skeptics in the world. People don't believe anything, really. I don't believe sometimes they don't even believe they're alive. But I just like to prove all of it.
Okay, now you're looking for funding still?
Well, it don't really matter. I'm gonna try to do it anyway.
Okay.
But funding would help, but it don't really have to happen.
Okay. Well, if you guys want to support Albert, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Questions, comments. And he's on Facebook. His Facebook page is Albert Atwell. You can see his name on the screen for spelling. His email is albert_hunter yahoo.com. Correct, Albert?
Yeah.
And contact him, that's going to be available as well. And of course, you guys already know what I do. You know, anyone looking for tropical astrology, also called Western astrology, let me know. I'm happy to help you. I focus mostly on birth charts. I also do principles of Eastern medicine and teach about fasting and basically how to circulate fluids through your body correctly. And also spiritual guidance. So if I can help you with any of that, let me know. The full list and descriptions on my YouTube channel in the About section. And let me know, guys. Happy to help. And thank you guys, really wonderful. And we will continue soon. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Albert.
All right. Thank you, Dave.